This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Madame Chaumette's first trip to the opera was also her last. Chaumette, a 56-year-old boarding house concierge, and her daughter attended that evening's performance from the balcony of Paris's Palais Garnier. It was 3 minutes past 9 on a May night in 1896. As an opera star belted out the final moments of Act 1 of Hell, all hell broke loose. A jarring flash of light and terrifying crash echoed throughout the auditorium as screams of panic filled the air. An electrical fire above the opera's grand chandelier melted a cable that sent two 10-kilo weights crashing through the ornate ceiling to the balcony below. The dust cleared to reveal the horribly mutilated corpse of Madame Chaumette. In 1909, an author named Gaston Leroux thought back to this horrific incident as he wrote a piece about a fabled ghost in the Palais Garnier named the Phantom of the Opera. Leroux originally covered the Chaumette incident as a journalist, sensationalizing it with a headline that read, 500 kilos on a concierge's head. That's when a morbid question popped into his mind. What if, instead of a weight falling into the audience, it was the entire chandelier? One book and over 7 movie adaptations later, The Phantom of the Opera cemented its place as a classic, a tale of pulp horror and unrequited love that eventually caught the eye of composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. The chandelier specifically. This is a story about defying the odds, about innovation, about failure, all to create one of the most iconic set pieces of all time. Meet Eric. He's spent the last 34 years trying to get someone to take his singing lessons, but nothing's worked. He's tried it all. Note writing, a magic lasso, pretending to be a dead father figure, all to no avail. Maybe instead of scaring people at parties, Eric should have been building a better website with Squarespace. Squarespace has all the tools to help turn Eric's side gig into his main hustle. This includes an easy-to-use video studio to post lessons, a members-only area for exclusive backstage content, and blogging tools to make writing threatening demands that much easier. Head to squarespace.com/waitinthewings and use code waitinthewings to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. The 1980s sentiment of excess in London arguably played a big role in creating the mega musical. Almost overnight, the stories and music grew grander in scale, with each magnificent spectacle topped off with a giant expensive cherry called the scenic coup de théâtre, a gimmick designed to leave audiences' jaws on the floor. From The Bridge and Starlight Express to The Tire and Cats, nobody did this better than composer Andrew Lloyd Webber, producer Cameron Mackintosh, and designer John Napier. A creative obsession took hold after Lloyd Webber read Leroux's Phantom in 1984. The story possessed all the ingredients for a successful mega musical: high drama, high romance, and the perfect coup de théâtre to float high above it all: a giant chandelier. In need of a director for this new project, Lloyd Webber approached Hal Prince at a Tony Awards nomination party. The musical landscape looked drastically different from Prince's heyday. The classic American musical he aligned himself with as the director of The Pajama Game and Company was replaced by roller skating trains and tap dancing cats. Trends moved forward, leaving the traditional director behind. Lloyd Webber pulled him aside and asked if he'd ever thought of directing a high romance. Prince responded, "You bet, kid. Got any ideas?" Almost 90 years after the horrifying incident of May 1896, the chandelier at the Palais Garnier still loomed in its ominous glory. Hal Prince voyaged through 5 floors of hidden mazes, underground lakes, and echoing hallways to gather intel for Lloyd Webber's next theatrical spectacle. Constructed from 1861 to 1875 by Charles Garnier, the humbly named Palais Garnier indulged in regal excess with grand marble staircases, sweeping green domes, and enough gold to make a Bond villain blush. At the heart of it all sits the chandelier, a mass of crystal and bronze with 400 light bulbs that cost about $3 million to make once adjusted for inflation. In early creative discussions with Prince, Lloyd Webber described his concept of opening the musical with a chandelier rising back to life over the audience. Lloyd Webber held fond memories of running around abandoned theaters as a child, and loved the idea of the reassembled fixture transporting audiences back to the opera in all its glory. Prince understood the importance of this effect the first time Lloyd Webber described it. How to pull it off was another question. Behind each floating tire and industrial swinging bridge was a man with a pencil. By 1985, John Napier was Andrew Lloyd Webber's go-to designer for big-budget spectacle. After designing Jesus Christ Superstar, Cats, and Starlight Express, it only made sense that Napier would helm Phantom. But that plan hit a barricade rather quickly. Napier was already designing Phantom producer Cameron Mackintosh's other mega musical, Les Mis, a task so large it prevented Napier from juggling both projects. Still, Mackintosh sensed Lloyd Webber's genuine excitement for Phantom. He suggested another designer, Maria Bjornson. Bjornson had yet to work in mainstream commercial theater, but her designs for the Royal Shakespeare Company caught Mackintosh's eye. As Mackintosh put it in an interview with Variety, it wasn't the grandeur that impressed. She was able to create a world I could believe in.
Maria was on board before there was a director. So the first thing was to find a director. And a number of directors were talked about. I'm Jonathan Allen, and I'm the associate designer of French with the Opera. Eventually, Hal was approached, and he said, I don't know who Maria is. So we put together a little portfolio and sent it to New York, and Hal went, okay, I can do this.
Bjornson wasted no time preparing the sets and costumes for Phantom's first reading at the 1985 Sydmonton Festival, a yearly presentation of Lloyd Webber's works in progress that he held in a tiny church on his estate. Bjornson worked relentlessly to build real sets for the tiny showing, even making a boat for the Phantom. But the real standout scenic design of the night glimmered high above an unsuspecting audience: the chandelier.
And was it just a literal chandelier? Just like a store-bought chandelier?
It was something off the shelf, yes. Yeah. I think it just dropped vertically. It didn't do anything other than that.
Simple, but effective. Phantom originally planned to stage a small, intimate show at Sadler's Wells Theater for 6 months before a potential move to the West End.
So we started designing it for Sadler's Wells, and then they went, no, I think we'll do it in the West End after all. And we started redesigning it for the Palace. Although then, of course, Les Mis moved there, and that came out. That sort of went out the window.
Luckily, director Hal Prince had another venue in mind: Her Majesty's Theatre. Near the end of the 80s, attending the theater was like taking a trip to Disneyland. The shows were louder, brighter, and more stimulating than ever. Lloyd Webber, Prince, and Bjornson sought to keep Phantom more grounded in its design. Prince described it in a creative brief as a black conjurer's box that everything comes out of. Bjornson limited the set to a few main props, thus making the audience fill in the blanks. Even the more elaborate set pieces were deceptively simple in their design. Take the staircase in the huge masquerade dance sequence, for example. It looks imposing at first, when really it's just a few wood planks lined with mannequins. Then, of course, there was the chandelier. Featured in many of Bjornsson's early drawings and models, an elaborate circular chandelier plummeted straight down into the audience. Some sketches even showed the Phantom riding down with it. Much like Prince, Bjornsson also journeyed through the Palais Garnier for inspiration. The opera house's mammoth chandelier captivated. But a light of that size would never fit on the stage. Bjornsson faced a challenge. Could she make the chandelier smaller in a way that the audience wouldn't notice? In pure Bjornsson style, the answer relied on some scenic trickery. Instead of a big circular chandelier, she made it a long, skinny oval. Artists used the foreshortening technique to create an illusion that objects have more depth than they actually do, an effect crucial for the chandelier. To anyone not seated directly underneath or far off to either side of it, the design and placement tricked the eye into making the chandelier look bigger and rounder than it actually was. The original chandelier took multiple scene shots to construct, due to the complex painting, lighting, and automation required. This included a steel frame painted to look like brass and thousands of beads.
Do you want to add just one tiny fact which people get often so wrong?
Absolutely.
There are 30,300 beads on the chandelier. Because I think there's some publicity that goes, there's only 3,000. It's not. It's 30,300. Sorry, there we go.
Countless directors and set designers in the 80s dreamt up these huge, spectacular coup de théâtre concepts. But it was the design engineer's job to actually bring them to life. Enter Mike Barnett and Will Bowen. The Les Mis barricades, the Starlight Express bridge, the Miss Saigon helicopter. Barnett and Bowen were no strangers to pushing the boundaries of engineering in the 80s and 90s. Resurrecting the full-scale chandelier in London proved a bit more complicated than in Sydmonton. Not only did the chandelier need to rise off the stage, it also needed to fly out over the heads of the audience and then fall back down without killing anyone.
The original engineering was kind of worked out, I'm going to say on a paper napkin because that term is used so much in this business. My name is Jake Bell, and I'm the production manager, production tech for Phantom of the Opera. Phantom was the first show to have real computerized automation. It was literally the beginning of the computer age of bringing computers in and automation and automating everything.
Barnett and Bowen devised a system of cables that resembled the string game Cat's Cradle.
Essentially, you have two motors and four cables, and they're all attached to the chandelier. So you want to lift it off the stage so it's off of its own weight. You pick it up first, and then you take up these motors while you let these motors go out. And when it reaches a certain point where they both have to go up, then the program tells it to take up slack at both ends.
In other words, the backstage cables tighten first to lift the chandelier off the floor. Then, the ceiling cables tighten while the backstage ones loosen to swing the chandelier out over the audience. From there, with the phantom organs blaring and lights flashing, the chandelier rises like a ghost towards the roof until it stops in line with the angel above the stage. This kept the magnificent coup de théâtre from blocking the entire show for those high in the balcony.
My name is Alan Lampel, and I'm the head electrician on Phantom of the Opera since 1988, January 26th. We saw it in four separate shops in its build, and came to us number 2, and we put all the harnessing in, connecting all these three pieces. It was not coming apart.
In the movie and the novel, the chandelier plummets straight down into the crowd. And in the book, it kills a concierge attending the opera for the first time. Sound familiar? Not so much with the musical. In London and New York, it falls at an angle.
And of course, originally, the London Chandelier didn't fall as fast as it does now. London and New York now fall about 5.5 to 6 seconds.
To ensure the chandelier didn't swing back into the audience, Burnett and Bowen placed 2 hidden sets of handles on the back.
Yes, the handles on the back, it becomes a pendulum. And that's where the problem comes, because you're going to come to the stage and control that last moment. And that's tricky. So in London, you had to catch it.
There's this big strobe effect that blinds the audience, and in that moment, 2 crew members come out and just grab onto it. My name is Greg Lavodi. I'm the production stage manager of Phantom of the Opera. And then there's a separate cue that allows it to, once it's grabbed, to just come down and sort of rest in its kind of, deconstructed, off-kilter look on the floor.
Very early on, the stage crew in London named the chandelier Ruthie, after Hal Prince's assistant, Ruthie Mitchell. As the crew put it, Ruthie was tiny, wonderful, and ferocious. A name especially befitting once the malfunction started. Just a little over a year after the small performance at Sydmonton, critics and audience members woke up eager for Phantom's first London preview on September 27, 1986. Then they picked up their morning papers. The preview was canceled. That week, no piece of scenery escaped the curse of the mechanical Phantom.
It was a huge show. Not that there's anything very difficult about each individual element of Phantom. It just happens to be in one show. So there's a lot to achieve. And that first time, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just trying to get it on.
To make matters worse, the London Council of Health and Safety didn't feel comfortable with a 2,000-pound chandelier barreling down towards the audience and considered banning the effect from the show. Additionally, out-of-control boats, a defective robot horse, and a bunch of pooping doves left Phantom a literal mess. So much so that one investor wondered if it was too late to get his money back. The mishaps left Macintosh with no other option but to cancel the first 2 preview performances.
It was a tough period, and people were sleeping in the theatre to try and get us through.
Cases of champagne intended for celebration became a way for the stage workers to drown their sorrows at the end of each frustrating night. Phantom officially opened at Her Majesty's Theatre on October 9th, 1986. Thanks to the canceled previews and scandalous gossip, the seats filled quickly, with anxious theatergoers ready to witness a train wreck. As Lloyd Webber recounts in his memoir, "I felt sick. I stood at the back of the stalls with Cameron, the audience now verging on the rowdy. There was a huge anticipatory laugh when the house lights dimmed. The covers ripped away, the organ blared, and the chandelier sparked to life. The condescending chuckles vanished. The chandelier floated off the stage and started its journey out towards the audience as they stared in astonishment as it floated above their heads. 2 spectacular minutes later, the chandelier completed its journey. Now, would it be able to make it back down? Phantom lyricist Richard Stogo always imagined selling premium seats in the middle of the theater. Seats which required patrons to sign a waiver stating, "I sit in this seat at my own risk," before the chandelier dropped at breakneck speeds. The importance of the chandelier drop left the Phantom team with little room to negotiate with the London Council of Health and Safety. Begrudgingly, the team agreed to slow the speed of the chandelier drop. Now, instead of a terrifying plunge, the chandelier floated down like a sigh on its downward but discreet journey, as theater critic Walter Kerr observed. Regardless, the chandelier amazed audiences. It caused such a stir that it became one of the musical's unofficial stars, especially once it transferred to Broadway.
Ours was the second chandelier done in the world after London. And so we followed exactly what they wanted and how they wanted it to work and the look.
The London chandelier is only 8 feet across on the biggest hoop, where New York is 10 feet across because it's a bigger theater. So we enlarged it for New York.
Up in the ceiling, over the audience, we had to put in steel structure over the dome of the audience to hold the weight of the motors and then the engineering weight of the piece as it's moving.
And it took, about a month and a half to do the real hard load-in, removing the old chandelier. And it's been in plastic for 34 years. I mean, this was quite the feat. Just imagine that.
New York critics rarely praised Lloyd Webber branded musicals, but no critic could deny the creative talent of Hal Prince and Maria Bjornson.
I still think that the lift and flight out at the beginning of the show is much more interesting than the crash. This is a magnificent something, lifting and going out.
To just stand there and watch the chandelier rise over the audience and the light that it basks everybody in, and everybody's eyes just looking up, up, up. And it's just like, it's an affirming reason as to why we do this.
I cried the very first time I saw the show, and I still cry like a baby. And I will do a lot of that in this countdown.
The Phantom Chandelier is just one in a long line of incredible set pieces in musical theater history. Click on this video to learn about 10 other set pieces that went way too hard.